When it comes to bands that shouldn't have ever went mainstream but did, System of a Down always catches people's eye, as when you see the way they sound, especially early on, you would have never thought they would catch on with the outside crowd, but they did. I mean, their first two records, their self-titled 1998 debut album, is seen as an underrated classic to this day, and in 2001 they dropped what many deem to be their magnum opus album, that being Toxicity. And then in 2002 they kind of released this album called Don't Steal This Album, ironically, or no, it was called Steal This Album. It wasn't as good as the first two, even though there are hardcore fans like myself that actually like the record, but you can tell there was just something wearing off when it came to the band and their sound. So when it came to their next project, or in this case projects, the band decided to take it up a notch and start experimenting with different sounds. For the most part, when bands and artists do this, their fan base isn't necessarily always down with it, because sometimes they just shy too far away from who they were before that it may be a turnoff. But System of a Down said, we're still going to give you the rowdy and just all over the place music, but there's going to be new sounds attached to it. And thus, in 2005, System of a Down took over the music world by releasing not one, but two albums within a 6-month span. The first being on my mother's birthday on May 17th of 2005, called Mesmerize. Now, for people who had questions as to how the album and the new sound of System of a Down was going to turn out, the lead-off single, BYOB, which stands for Bring Your Own Bombs, let people know immediately that this is still System of a Down, no matter what sound they plan on doing. This album features 11 tracks. It is the band's shortest album at 36 minutes, and it gives you a little bit of everything. I mean, even after BYOB, there's songs like Revenja, Cigar, Radio, Video, This Cocaine Makes Me Feel Like I'm on This Song, Violent Pornography, Sad Statue, Old School Hollywood, which actually features like these synth kind of sounds that you would never expect from the band either, but yet just seems to fit in so well. And how did this album do in particular? Well, it hit #1 on the Billboard Top 200 charts. It's not often you see a band like this and an album like this reach the heights that it did, but they weren't done, because the hype was only getting even bigger when the new album, Hypnotize, was about to release on November 22nd. This finished off the double album and basically gave us 23 tracks, a little over 70 minutes of new System of a Down material. But the thing with Hypnotize over Mesmerize is that Hypnotize actually takes the experimenting to another level. Again, it has that craziness to it, but there's a lot more, I think, sounds that System of a Down was doing that you would never associate them with, and I think this one makes that album more interesting than the first one. Even though Mesmerize to me is a perfect 10 out of 10, if I can give a rating higher than a 10 to an album, it would be Hypnotize, for the sheer fact that, again, still without losing their identity, they were still able to craft this great album that even their old hardcore fans were still into. This one actually had a little less of a recognition than the first album did, but just a tad bit, because again, like Mesmerize did, Hypnotize hit #1 on the Billboard Top 200 charts, making this the first time in 1 year, at least in the rock category, that a band had two #1 albums in the same year. Why don't you ask the kids at Tiananmen Square? Because let's be honest, it's hard to create a double album, because when you're doing that, you're either coming up with two different concepts, or you're coming up with one big concept that tells a story. Now, System of a Down was always political in their work, and these two albums definitely keep that going, having a lot to do with, you know, nuclear war and the way Hollywood is controlling people nowadays. I mean, in the song Old School Hollywood, they basically talk about how, what was it, Tony Danza and Frankie Avalon played in this charity baseball game, because it's like old school Hollywood baseball is mainly the hook of the song that you're getting. It may seem weird to people who don't understand what's going on, but when you listen more into it, it becomes more clear that this is some sort of political statement. Heck, even on songs on Hypnotize, like Vicinity of Obscenity, there's the lyrics, banana, banana, terracotta pie, and at first listen, you're just like, what the hell is going on here? But it starts to become clear, especially when you get to the song She's Like Heroin, that this talks about prostituting and pimping, basically, and how women can get controlled by that because they're vulnerable in a way that that men can't understand, only women can. And it just becomes this whole thing about this is happening right in front of our eyes, and yet we continue to do nothing about it. Like, even when they decided to experiment with some sound, they just kept talking about things that they were passionate about and wanted to show people the corruption in so many other different ways that it made for two albums that frankly probably are the best of the band's career. And again, I know people say might not be the best albums they've released, but when you look at it and what they were trying to accomplish, they definitely hit it out of the park and were able to make an even bigger name for themselves even after songs like Toxicity and Chop Suey and Aerials brought them to new heights. You then bring in the song Hypnotize, BYOB, and Lonely Day. The most loneliest day of my life. And boom, the band is now officially in the mainstream, and what would make most fan bases mad about them going more mainstream, their main audience was kind of like, this is still good, and we love the fact that System of a Down is getting love outside of the bubble that we have here. It was almost like System of a Down fans were welcoming of the people who were enjoying because of how unique their sound was and how all over the place it felt. It never occurred to anybody that it was going to get this far, but yet it did so well. Another thing that goes on in these two albums is that singers Serj Tankian and Darren Malakian actually kind of come together a lot more than they do in the previous record, because on the first three albums it was mainly Serj would sing most of the main song and Darren might come in with, you know, some background vocals here or sing this part here. But on these two records, it's almost kind of like they're flip-flopping and they're harmonizing together, making for a much more interesting listen, because now when there's parts that Darren is singing and then Serj comes in and sings himself, and you never really realize how well they sound together until you actually hear it during these records, and I think it's something that they incorporated a lot better, and we were kind of hoping that following this record we would get a lot more of that. Psych! Tensions in the band rose after this, and they never would go on to make an album ever again. I know people say there's still a chance, but we're approaching 20 years at this point, and even though the band has kind of popped up here and there, including releasing 2 singles in 2019, those who protect the land, beating the devil, we never run from the devil, we never summon the devil, we never hide from the devil, we never... I just don't ever see them getting back together to be able to create an album and tour for it, because lead singer Serj Tankian has said that he does not like touring and that he has given the band permission many times to go on tour and create music with a new singer, but it seems like the band wants Serj to be in it so bad that even though they want to go back doing what they want to do, they know that Serj isn't going to give them the time, yet they keep trying to crawl back like the ex-girlfriend, their ex-boyfriend that's just can't accept rejection. It's still very messy at this point, but even when they released those 2 songs, Protect the Land and Genocidal Humanoids in 2020, you kind of still saw that, yes, when they get together, they can still make magic happen, but for the most part, we kind of knew that that was really all they were going to get, because they came together for those 2 singles in particular to, again, protest against wars going on in their home country. Other than that, that was the only reason they made that, and I think the proceeds to those songs went to charities towards their home country. Leaving Mesmerize and Hypnotize as the last 2 albums of actual new material that we got from the band, and the only time they really got to start experimenting and just getting into even more of the mainstream that hope was up for them. They were on a high note, and I guess they just realized that with the tension going on in the band, they would never get to reach that high again, so they decided to call it quits, and they've been on and off for 15 plus years at this point, with no new album even closely in sight. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts on the double 2005 album from System of a Down, Mesmerize and Hypnotize, and how it changed rock music for the better and brought this new unique sound to the mainstream that we had never really heard before, or at least heard in the mainstream play before. Just kind of, you know, something like that would stay underground and under wraps, and the only people that would give a shit were the fan base. But when System of a Down came up and their music kind of reached a lot of people, especially with the political stance and views, they became, I think, even more huge than they thought they were ever going to be. And did that have some effect on the band down the line? Maybe, probably, but in the end, I mean, that's just what comes when you make some great material with some great stances, and you just reach a lot of people to that point. But yeah, would really love to hear in the comments below what you have to think, and until then, stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next one.
Sweet berries ready for two ghosts are no different than you. Banana, terracotta, terracotta pie.